We think our homes are our sanctuaries, the one place where the world can't touch us, where we can lock the door and finally be safe. But imagine lying in your bed in the pitch black and hearing a sound. Not from the hallway, not from outside, but from inside the walls right next to your head. You tell yourself it's just the house settling, just the wind. But deep down, your instincts are screaming at you. Because in the case we are discussing today, the monster wasn't under the bed. It wasn't a ghost. It was a living, breathing person, watching the family sleep for months. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Story Jungle. My name is Niki. Here, we don't just tell crime stories. We explore the darkest corners of human nature. Today's case is one of the most disturbing home invasions in history, a story that will make you check your closets before you sleep tonight. This is the story of Daniel LaPlante. Our nightmare begins in 1986. In a quiet, sleepy town called Pepperell, Massachusetts. Inside a typical wooden house lived the Bowen family. Frank, a hardworking father, and his two teenage daughters, Tina and Karen. They were a grieving family. They had just lost their mother to cancer. The house was already filled with sadness, but soon that sadness turned into fear. It started subtly, like a game designed to drive them crazy. Tina would come home from school and notice small, impossible changes. The television would be changing channels on its own. The volume would go up and down. Items of furniture were moved just a few inches. Imagine the confusion. You put your hairbrush down, you turn around, and it's gone. Frank, the father, was a logical man. He refused to believe in the supernatural. He told the girls, "You are just imagining things. It's the grief playing tricks on your mind." But the girls knew. They could hear it. Footsteps in the attic when no one was up there. The toilet flushing in the middle of the night. Terrified, the sisters decided to do something dangerous. They held a seance in their bedroom to communicate with the spirit. They asked into the silence, "Is anyone here? Knock if you can hear us." And instantly, from the hollow space inside the bedroom wall, came the reply. Knock, knock, knock. Panic took over. But the entity wasn't done playing. A few days later, they found a message scrawled on the basement wall. It looked like blood. It read, "I'm in your room. Come find me." It turned out to be ketchup, but the threat was very real. Whatever was in that house wanted to be found. Tina and Karen were petrified. They couldn't spend another second in that house. They ran to a neighbor's house and called their father at work. When Frank Bowen heard the news, he didn't feel fear. He felt blind rage. He thought, "This isn't a ghost. This is some punk kid from the neighborhood playing a sick prank on my grieving daughters." He drove home, stormed through the front door, and grabbed a baseball bat. He was ready to beat the ghost out of his house. He checked the living room. Empty. He checked the kitchen. Silent. Then, he marched into the girls' bedroom, the room where the knocking came from. Everything seemed normal, except for the closet door. Frank reached out and yanked the door open. He expected to find a scared teenager hiding among the clothes. But what he saw was pure nightmare fuel. Standing there wasn't a kid. It was Daniel LaPlante. But he didn't look human. His face was painted entirely in bizarre tribal patterns, like a savage warrior. He was wearing a wig, and in his hand, gripped tight, was a hatchet. This wasn't a prank. This was a predator. Before Frank could react, Daniel lunged. He swung the hatchet wildly, screaming. Frank, terrified for his daughters, backed away. He grabbed the girls, and they managed to escape the room, running out of the house to safety. Police cars swarmed the property within minutes. They surrounded the house. There was no way out. Officers with guns drawn entered the home, ready to arrest the intruder. They searched every room, under every bed, inside every closet. But the house was empty. Daniel LaPlante had vanished into thin air. How could a human being disappear in a surrounded house? One officer noticed something strange near the bathroom, a toilet that seemed slightly loose, or a panel in the wall that didn't look quite right. Upon closer inspection, they realized the horrifying truth. Daniel hadn't run out the back door. He had gone back in. He had squeezed himself into the crawl space between the walls. He was still there, listening to the police searching for him, right beneath their feet. The house was surrounded. Floodlights were blasting through the windows. Inside, the police were baffled. They had checked the attic, the basement, under the beds. Nothing. But one officer, Officer Stephen Spofford, noticed something inconsistent. He realized that the wall in the hallway seemed thicker than it should be. He started tapping on the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Most spots sounded solid, but near a built-in cabinet, the sound changed. It was hollow. He found a small, almost invisible seam in the wood, a secret door that shouldn't exist. With his gun drawn, he pried it open. A blast of stale, warm air hit him in the face. What they found inside wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a home. Daniel LaPlante hadn't just run in there to hide from the police. He had been living there for 2 solid months. Just take a moment to process that. 2 months. The space was narrow, barely enough to turn around in. It was filled with a disgusting collection of items stolen from the family. He had made a bed out of old insulation and a stolen sleeping bag. The floor was littered with candy wrappers, leftover food from the Bowen's fridge, and, most disturbing of all, waste. Since he couldn't leave to use the bathroom, he had bottles filled with urine lined up against the wall. He was living like a parasite inside the body of the house, feeding off them, breathing their air, completely undetected. But the filth wasn't the scary part. The scary part was the intention. Police found a hand drill inside the wall. Daniel had bored tiny, almost invisible holes through the plaster into the bathroom and the bedrooms. From his dark corner, he had a front row seat to their lives. When Tina was getting dressed, he was watching. When the family was crying over the loss of their mother, he was listening. He knew their secrets. He knew their fears. He knew exactly when they were vulnerable. It creates a terrifying question. How many times did Tina look at that wall, unaware that an eye was looking right back at her? Police ordered him to come out. He refused. He stayed silent in the dark. Knowing he might be armed with that hatchet, the officers didn't risk crawling in. Instead, they pumped the crawl space full of tear gas. Seconds later, coughing and gasping for air, the ghost of Pepperell emerged from the wall. Covered in dust, smelling of filth, and still wearing that terrifying face paint and wig. As they dragged him out in handcuffs, the family finally saw the face of their tormentor. It was Daniel, the awkward boy from school, the boy who couldn't take no for an answer. But here's the twist. You might think this is where the story ends, He goes to jail, the family is safe. You would be wrong. Because prison couldn't hold Daniel LaPlante, and his thirst for violence was just getting started. Now, you might be asking yourself, who creates a monster like this? Was he born evil? To understand the horror that comes next, we have to look inside his mind. Reports reveal that Daniel's childhood was a nightmare of its own. He was physically and sexually abused by his father. Psychiatrists later described him as a boy who felt completely invisible. He had a deep, twisted need for control. Living in the walls gave him that control. It made him feel like a god in that house. He wasn't just hiding, he was the puppet master, pulling the strings of a terrified family. But sadly, the system failed to see how dangerous he really was. They saw a troubled teen. They didn't see the predator waiting to strike again. Daniel was sent to a juvenile detention center, but prison couldn't hold Daniel LaPlante. Daniel was sent to a juvenile detention center. The Bowen family finally slept peacefully, thinking the nightmare was over. But Daniel wasn't finished. While in custody, he didn't show remorse. He showed patience. Using wax from the floor, he managed to make a mold of a guard's key. He was cunning, manipulative, and desperate to be free. In October 1987, Daniel LaPlante used that key to unlock his cell and walked right out of the facility. He was free again. He stole a gun from a neighbor's house and vanished into the woods of Massachusetts. For weeks, locals were terrified. The boy in the walls was loose, but this time, he wasn't looking for a wall to hide in. He was looking for blood. December 1st, 1987, Townsend, Massachusetts. Priscilla Gustafson was a 33-year-old nursery school teacher. She was kind, loved by everyone, and heavily pregnant with her third child. She was at home with her two little kids, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. Daniel LaPlante broke into their home. I won't go into the graphic details out of respect for the family, but what happened that afternoon was pure evil. He took the lives of Priscilla, little Abigail, and William. He didn't know them. They hadn't rejected him. They were just there. When Andrew Gustafson, the father, came home from work that evening, he found a scene that no human should ever see. In one afternoon, an entire family was wiped out. The creepy boy who hid in walls had graduated to becoming a monster. The police launched a massive manhunt. They knew exactly who they were looking for. 2 days later, a police officer spotted a man near a dumpster trying to hide. It was Daniel. He tried to run, but this time there was nowhere to hide. No walls, no closets. He was arrested and eventually sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. He is currently in prison, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. He tried to appeal his sentence multiple times, claiming he had a troubled childhood. But the courts and the community never forgot the terror he caused. The story of Daniel LaPlante teaches us a terrifying lesson. We often fear the unknown, ghosts, spirits, monsters under the bed. But the Bowen family learned that sometimes the monster isn't supernatural. Sometimes the monster is just a boy who refuses to let go. And sometimes the scariest things in the world are the ones hiding in plain sight. What do you think? Would you ever check the crawl spaces in your house after hearing this? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the darkness, please like the video and subscribe to Story Jungle. I'm Niki, and I'll see you in the next mystery.